Hello, buttons. I'm sure it will surprise you greatly to hear that I have, just a few thoughts about the new off-campus series. I'm increasingly of the opinion that there is no one right way to adapt anything. Like, truly, there's no one golden formula that works for everything. There are only good and bad adaptations. Hey fam, welcome back. Today we are going to be talking about Off-Campus. I have watched the series a couple times now. I binged it. I have enjoyed it tremendously. Just spoilers right off the bat, I guess. I want to talk about why I think it's a good adaptation, but I also want to talk about the art of adaptation more generally and adaptations of romance more specifically. That's been something of an unofficial theme here for the last couple of months, and I think it's fun. I like living in this age of pop culture romance resurgence. I think we're getting some really choice properties that are each doing different things, but also can each teach us different lessons of what good adaptations look like when you take something from one medium and put it into another. I also want to talk a little bit about fandom and reaction to adaptations because, boy golly, if you're new here, the philosophy of this channel is that we are not purists. I am not a purist. If you're a purist, like, please come argue with me in the comments. I love a good argument. But the philosophy that I bring to pop culture and media has always been that an adaptation needs to stand on its own merits. You can love source material and you can love adaptations. You can like some of the changes that are made in that process. You can dislike it. That usually tends to be a matter of taste. What I care about more is, are the changes good for the new medium? Do they serve the needs of that medium in an intelligent way? Do they thoughtfully adapt to changes of time, culture, and language that make the medium or the source material more accessible and enjoyable for the audience? Like, change is not a bad thing in the world of decadence. The question is always to ask is, why were these changes made? Were they executed well? And are the core emotional themes of the story still there? So that regardless of the changes, are we still staying true to whatever it was about the original material that was so attractive, compelling, whatever it was that made you fall in love with it? That's kind of the criteria that I bring to all adaptations generally. So like I said, I definitely want to talk about this series like in detail. I think it is a good adaptation and I want to talk about why. I also want to talk about, and I hope, please God, kids, I want to do this in a normal way. I do want to reference some other recent current pop culture romance in connection to this series, but I do not want us to spiral out of control. I do not want the toxicity of booktokness to creep its way in here. I am not a booktok girly. I'm not on TikTok. I've never been on TikTok. I don't want to go on TikTok. Booktok scares me. But there is already discourse about, purity or fidelity to the books, and golly, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to talk about in this series because it is so beloved. But I'm staking it out. I'm laying my claim out to start. I think this is a good adaptation. I'm going to make my case to you why I think that is. I want to talk about adaptations more generally. And then I kind of want to, talk a little bit about how we, the audience, are or are not training ourselves to evaluate adaptations, in my opinion, correctly, which is to say on their own merits. Cool? As always, I don't write scripts. This is a riff. This is an extended riff, but I think what I want to do is I want to talk about the context of the original series. I want to talk about the books, the time in which they were created. Then I want to set it aside. I want to talk about the show and then see if I can maybe bridge the process from getting one to the other. So let's start there. Let's see how this goes. In the world of publishing, as I've said in other videos, there are trends, there are movements, there are cultural changes that cause different genres and subgenres, tropes and themes to rise to the surface. And part of the reason that this series has the fandom that it does is because when it was published, it had a genuine kind of breakthrough moment. It bridged a lot of subgenres because remember, romance is a galaxy. It is huge, it is vast, and within the wider galaxy of romance, there are individual constellations, to torture the metaphor, of different subgenres. And within those subgenres, there are different tropes and subtropes. There are different common story beats. What generally makes a story stand out from, the vastness of the canon is on how well that subgenre, those tropes, those story beats are packaged and delivered, the uniqueness of the character voice, or how the author chooses to bundle those tropes and subtropes and genres and what have you, those story beats together in an individual package to tell a specific story. When Elle Kennedy first published her first book, The Deal, it was published in 2015. And what it did is it combined the new adult genre, so again, late teens to early 20s, often usually with a college or university angle or early career angle, with the sports genre, because yes, this is another hockey series. We will come back to this, I think, I promise. And also included a lot of heavier sub-themes. I brought a lot of this up in my previous video, which I will link, but one of the reasons that I initially enjoyed the series when it first came out and was first published was that, as I've said before, romance is actually a lot deeper than most people give it credit for, and the best examples of the genre, in my opinion, are the ones that don't shy away from harder human topics. Romance fundamentally is about people, it is about relationships, it's about interpersonal relationships. Yes, they're about sex, but not exclusively. The Off-Campus series by Elle Kennedy tackles different difficult subtext in each of the individual stories and narrative in a way that felt vulnerable and authentic and appealing to many, many people. There are 4 books in total: The Deal, The Mistake, The Score, and The Goal. Elle Kennedy has also more recently published a collection of kind of novellas, gave kind of bonus epilogue endings to each of those called The Legacy. But those 4 books are the original off-campus canon. The first 2 were published in 2015, and the second 2 were published in 2016. And I bring that up because I think that is fundamental to the discourse around this as a medium. Put a pin in it, as I always say. As is very common in romance, these are a series of interlocking and overlapping stories where a group of people, in this case a group of friends and couples who do and don't overlap and intersect, build a community and all experience their individual storylines together, but those storylines do intersect and add to one another. You can jump into this series whenever you want and enjoy one of the books as a standalone, because each narrative does stand alone in its own right. But if you like interconnected romance, as I do, you can read the books all together to really enjoy the full history that's laid out for you. Books themselves take place over approximately 2-ish years of university life for the main characters at different points in their university career. And the last book also continues life post university for some of the characters. But that's what you're getting. That is the setup of the Off-Campus series. 2-ish years in the life of a group of young people whose relationships overlap and intersect with one another, and the wider friendship communities that they build and enjoy in the context of a university setting. Here's some spoilers. I will mark this in the comment notes. If you've not read the books and you don't want them to be spoiled, maybe skip ahead a little bit, but I am going to touch on the basic plots of the books. while also caveating that the books and the TV show are going to be different. So things might change from the initial book. We'll come back to this, don't worry, but we have one full season of the TV show now, which has adapted largely the first book in the series, The Deal, with bonus content. The Deal is about Garrett Graham and Hannah Wells, a star athlete and a music major, and their relationship of finding one another, overcoming their own unique past issues, and building a relationship together. Welcome to romance, people. The trope is the fake dating trope, where they are going to pretend to be in a relationship with one another for external reasons, before, of course, falling hopelessly in love with one another. The special elements come from the from the backstory of each of the characters. I mentioned this more obliquely in my previous video. I didn't reference which character this applied to, but now that the show is out, and obviously the books have been out for over a decade, we're just gonna say it. Hannah is the survivor of sexual assault and rape, and Garrett Graham is a domestic violence survivor. Each of these two characters, within the context of the books and the context of the TV show, are at different stages of having dealt with or not dealt with these past issues and how it affects their relationships with their friends and their romantic attachment to one another. Again, spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. Do not watch if you do not want to know what happens in the books. But the next book in the series is called The Mistake, and it is John Logan's story. John Logan is Garrett Graham's best friend. We've already met him in the TV show. His journey to love includes a virginal but incredibly mature and wise heroine in the form of Grace Ivers, who we got a glimpsing reference to in the TV show. Love that. I really like Grace as a character. I think that she is wise beyond her years, and I really like John Logan as a character. In the books, the background issues really are Grace's youth and inexperience and how she is thoughtfully choosing to come into herself and her adulthood. John is a star athlete in university, but his life post-university is kind of laid out for him in some pretty heartbreaking ways. Unlike Garrett Graham in book one, who is the son of an NHL player and wealthy in his own right, John comes from a significantly less privileged position. He is the son of a mechanic, and his, in the book's, father is dealing with crippling alcoholism. John is assuming and planning to take over his father's business post-university and provide care for his alcoholic, really, really debilitated father, because his older brother, again in the books, has been caring for their father whilst John has been at university and being able to pursue his education. But the brothers are going to then trade off and allow the older brother to travel and have a bit of a life while John steps into the main caretaker role for the business and their dad. He is talented enough to make it in the NHL, but he has cut himself off from the opportunities because he feels a huge amount of responsibility to care for his father. That's what he sees his job as being. He takes it very seriously, but he understandably also feels a high degree of resentment towards it. He is a really, really sympathetic character, in my opinion. I think he's probably my favorite of the book boys, to be perfectly honest. But the tension that he feels is the obligations that he has to his family, the frustration that he has in having some opportunities but not others, and the fact that he feels trapped by his own choices but would probably still make all of those same choices again, is a very, very thoughtful set of conflicts, in my opinion. The third book in the series is Dean and Allie. Again, a fantastic little bundle. This is the secret dating trope, and not even dating. Dean and Allie start as, fuck buddies, hookup buddies. And they're each in very different places. Dean is kind of a glorious man whore, not toxic, but a man whore nonetheless. Allie is very much a relationship girl who chooses to end a long-term relationship with a boyfriend she's had since the start of university because She sees herself going in a different place than he is, and, you know, good for her. She's chasing her dreams and her goals and her aspirations, and she kind of knows what she wants, but she also doesn't really know what she wants. Dean comes from extraordinary privilege. I think he is from the wealthiest family in this book. Like he comes from closer to generational wealth, perhaps, as opposed to Garrett, who comes from sports-based wealth with his own father. Dean comes from money. Allie, more humble circumstances, but she is ferociously talented as an actress. She wants to pursue performance as a career, but they are both where they're at, kind of towards the end of their college career and not yet ready to go out into adulthood. They start hooking up, feelings are caught for one another, and the conflict that they deal with is kind of interesting. Both Garrett and Logan have, you know, fun combinations of internal and external challenges. Dean's conflict is largely self-created, but then inflicted by an external circumstance. Again, spoiler, do not keep watching if you don't want to know what happens in the books, but his best friend dies. And Dean, who is kind of an unserious party boy, who is very privileged, he's naturally incredibly intelligent and is on a legitimate path to law school, but he's kind of drifting because he doesn't really feel called to that. He's not going to go pro the way that Garrett is and John wants to. He's anticipating going to law school and joining his family's firm, but he is an inveterate party boy who dabbles in substances, shall we say, and the loss of his best friend sets him off on an absolute bender, which ends up costing him pretty dearly. Meanwhile, our main leading lady is Allie. She is Hannah, Garrett's girl's best friend. She is ferociously talented, but again, her conflict is very much that she is trying to come into her own. She's trying to finish school. She's trying to set up her career ambitions for herself, get her on the path to performance as a career. She doesn't know who she is outside of a relationship and very much wants to have some space to find herself, but has unexpectedly fallen for a very unexpected man. Her background, though, is that her dad has, I believe, MS. He is a widower. Her mother has passed. She provides a degree of care for her father, but also romanticizes her parents' relationship quite a bit, misses her mother tremendously, and, you know, is growing into adulthood without the benefit of her mother's guidance, right? That's the kind of set of bundles of traumas and conflicts that they have to overcome. And they do, and it's very satisfying. Full disclosure, this is my least favorite of the books, but that is purely a taste preference. Maybe we'll talk more about taste, but personal taste is a thing, and that's okay. Finally, the last book is The Goal, and this is John Tucker's book. John Tucker is the last of the boys from the hockey house. He is kind of similar to John Logan in that he doesn't come from privilege. He is at Breyer University on an athletic scholarship. He is not going pro after university, but is enjoying being a student athlete in the meantime. He is planning on moving back to Texas, where he's from, buying a business and becoming an upstanding member of society. There's a lot of parental issues in this. I will come back to this, but his mother is a widow. He wants to move closer to her to take care of her. He has a really good relationship with her, but, you know, that's him. He's kind of happy-go-lucky, even though, you know, he struggles with money. It's not the same way as Logan. He's enjoying his athletics like Dean, but he doesn't have, you know, Garrett's trajectory. He is just kind of a fundamentally decent guy. I really like the character of John Tucker personally because he's just a decent guy. In fact, all of the guys are. I think that's part of the appeal. But he ends up getting a girl pregnant. The girl he gets pregnant is named Sabrina. Sabrina is a kick-ass woman, hell-bent on law school. In many ways, I think she's probably the most tenacious and impressive of female characters because, in my opinion, she's the one who's overcoming the most structural obstacles. Yes, Hannah's storyline about overcoming sexual assault is really powerful, and I really like how both the book and the show handle it. I'll come back to that. But Sabrina comes from poverty. She has been raised by her grandmother. Her creepy ass stepfather still lives in the home. She is working multiple jobs. She is putting herself through school through these, and she is hell-bent on law school. She is going to escape the cycle of poverty that she has been born into. Crucially, not, I would say, abuse in the way of, say, like domestic violence with Garrett Graham, but kind of just common cycles of family dynamics when you do come from generational poverty, where you might feel trapped by your circumstances or don't see a way out. Sabrina sees education as her way out and law school as her path forward, and then she ends up pregnant. The conflicts in this are kind of self-evident, but John and Sabrina have to decide whether or not they're going to keep the baby, what that means their future is going to look like, how they, as very, very young prospective parents, would approach parenthood, whether or not they want to be together, because they don't start out as a couple, they start out as a hookup, and kind of what their obligations are to one another, and to this unexpected family that they end up building together. I really like the story, not a lot of people do, and I think that's because most of it takes place post-graduation. You know, the first 3 stories are completely bounded by the college experience. The last book in the series extends past graduation into young adulthood, I would say, or early adulthood. New adulthood? I don't know. Early 20s. The interconnectivities, though, are there. Garrett and Hannah have a beautiful love story. Logan is initially crushing on Hannah, which we see in the TV show, but you know, then he finds Grace and all is well. All of 4 of the boys live together. Dean hooks up with Allie, who is of course Hannah's best friend. Dean has previously hooked up with Sabrina, who ends up with John Tucker. It's a little bit incestuous, but hey, college, baby. And that's it. That's the world of the books, right? That is what the TV show is going to be based on. Okay, so if that is the source material, how did this show get made? Well, I'll link some interviews, some of which are on video, some of which are written, that the showrunner has done. But let me just say, as someone who read the books originally a decade ago, has reread them since and tremendously enjoyed them, I can tell, in my opinion, the showrunner and the writer's room really, really liked these books. They loved them. They loved them as source material. They liked the characters tremendously. I've ranted about this in other videos, but in my opinion, you can tell when a rom-com, which again, I don't tend to personally like, is kind of just being lazy, relying on tropes and story beats to just kind of churn out another variation on a narrative arc that we've seen before. What makes a good romance stand out, in my opinion, is the depth of characters, the kind of chemistry between the relationships, including the friendships that you see on the screen, the secondary plot elements that add depth and gravitas to it. If you love rom-coms, great, I'm so happy for you. I don't, because I tend to find them too formulaic and fluffy. And that's a weird thing to say for someone who loves romance, which is kind of definitionally formulaic. But I contend that what makes a good romance stand apart is how the author or the showrunner or the creator chooses to package different themes and tropes, and how well they write and put a character into the world that they've created. Like I said, I'll link some of the interviews with the showrunner that I think explains her process. She's very, very transparent about it, what the involvement of Elle Kennedy, the author, was, how she approached building this show. Like, the content is there, you can read it for yourself. But I think it's critical that she pitched adapting, not the deal, one book. She pitched adapting the series off campus as a broader piece of work. Because, as I've just explained at length, the deal is one story, but off campus is several overlapping, interconnecting stories taking place over 2 years. And this is where I think we need to start thinking about how different mediums require different choices to be made. Because what works on the page is not always necessarily going to work the same way on a screen. And what works as a book, where you are able to focus on the intense internal emotional journey of usually two people, a TV show pitched as an ensemble cast is fundamentally doing different things. The show has to make we, the audience, care about it in a slightly different way. It has to set up multiple storylines at the same time, whereas in the books, they can kind of unfold and expand at their own rate. The way that you experience a book is different from the way we experience a TV show. And I think the showrunner also does a pretty good job of articulating that she's aware of the issues of making a TV show today in 2026, where people have multiple screens competing for their attention, where they are flooded with choices about what they can watch, different channels, different streaming services, that she knows she has to capture and maintain attention in a different way than a book reader does. I think you can see those choices reflected in the show and how they put it together, how they have clearly chosen to approach the storytelling, and how they choose to trust the audience to figure some things out, to let certain story moments breathe, to frankly drop some story moments that might not work anymore in an adaptation that happens 10 plus years after the source material came out. I am going to do a bit of a recap of the show in a second, but I really want to dwell on this idea of adaptations because, as you might be able to tell from this, I am thinking about this so much, both in the context of this show, in the context of my last video on the reactions to Christopher Nolan's Odyssey. Let me just say, a certain kind of man online, TM, defending Nolan, and booktok people with very, very strong opinions on books. The Venn diagram is a circle, emotionally speaking. As I said at the start, my philosophy, the ethos that I'm bringing to the conversation, once again, is that adaptations have to stand on their own merit. I don't mind changes. The questions I have are, do the changes work? Do they make internal sense in the new medium? Are the changes mutually consistent, i.e., did you change something in the plot but not in the characterizations, which then creates a discordant note? No. Does everything work together to give the same emotional payoff that respects the core themes of the source material, but that might make changes about how exactly you arrive at the destination? Okay, let me give some examples of what I think good and bad adaptations can look like. And I'm going to try and draw on things that speak to this particular conversation in terms of content, but I also want to touch on the subject of different mediums having different requirements. So let's stay in the world of romance. In a previous video, I referenced Joe Wright's adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. I really like that adaptation. But I also really love the 1990s A&E miniseries with Jennifer L. and Colin Firth, OG. These are both, in my opinion, good adaptations, but they are doing very, very different things. Number one, the A&E miniseries is trying, and in my opinion, wildly succeeds, at doing a historically accurate period piece, telling the narrative, Jane Austen's original OG narrative, with high fidelity. This informs everything from the costume changes to how it was shot to how the characters were made up. It is not trying to shrink the story. It is not trying to breeze past anything. It is trying to quite literally put as much of the books in their original form on screen. And in that respect, it succeeds wildly. It is a masterclass in historically accurate period adaptation. It's so good. It holds up beautifully. It is the book on screen. It also took many hours of TV to produce. So if you're going to try and tell the same story in a more truncated form, say a movie, where you're not going to have many, many, many hours of screen time. You might get 1.5. You're going to have to make changes. You're not going to be able to hit every single line, every single emotional beat, every single aesthetic choice in the same way, because the constraints of the two mediums are totally separate. Not only that, watching Keira Knightley and Matthew McFadden are very different than watching Jennifer L. and Colin Firth. I don't think one is better than the other. I think they are two variations on the same story, with the actors and the directors interpreting the same source text. I would call the miniseries, again, a period accurate adaptation whose goal was high fidelity. And I'd call the Joe Wright adaptation a movie whose goal was high aesthetic and emotional fidelity. He was leaning into the romanticism of the show. And this comes across in the music. It comes across in the costuming, not all of which is historically or period accurate at all. It comes across in the character design and the makeup choices. It absolutely comes across in the score. It comes across in how he chooses to shoot, what lines he chooses to leave in, what shots he chooses to linger on. He's telling an emotional story, whereas the miniseries is, giving a literary adaptation. They're both good. They're both true to the source material, but they're not doing the same thing, and they're not trying to do the same thing. They're taking the same source material, loving the same source material, and making choices about how they want to bring that source material forward in different mediums with different constraints, different opportunities, and different desires aesthetically. Let's talk about TV. Another series with a wild fandom is Interview with a Vampire. I love Anne Rice. I haven't read her in many, many, many years. Like, it's probably been at least a decade and a half since I last touched one of those books. But I remember loving Anne Rice and her gothic glory. Interview with a Vampire has been adapted multiple times in my lifetime. And similar to my previous, there is an example of a movie and an example of a TV show, which I would argue both are good adaptations that are very different from one another. The Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise movie adaptation is trying to do something very different than the AMC TV series. The aesthetics are different. The themes are different. And in the TV series in particular, they made a lot of changes from the source material. But I would argue that the changes that they made allow them to explore a lot of the themes of the source material with emotional fidelity. It's not plot point, literary fidelity, but the aesthetics and the emotion of the TV show are just as good, if not better in some ways, than the movie adaptation, even though, again, in my opinion, both adaptations are good. They're just wildly different from one another. I think those differences stem from a lot of the same reasons. You can do more in long form content with a TV show than you can with a movie. You can, you shoot differently, you write differently. And the choices that they made in the casting and the aesthetics and the setting of the story means that they can explore themes in different, and I find very, very impactful ways. I really enjoyed Interview with a Vampire. I wasn't as fanatical about it as some people. Shout out to my girl X. She adores it the way that I adored Heated Rivalry. But I did like it, and I loved the aesthetics of it. The aesthetics of the TV show are very different from the movie, and that's okay. I want to also give an example of how medium jumping changes the requirements of what you can or should try to do in different spaces. One of my favorite theater experiences that I ever had in London was the play War Horse. War Horse is based on a book, a beloved, British classic. The book is a children's book. It was written in the 1980s, and it is something of a British classic, but it is a children's book. It was adapted for a stage play in the early 2000s, and then Steven Spielberg saw the stage play and further adapted both the book and aspects of the stage play for the cinema, right? So original source material and 2 different mediums that came out of it. I loved the stage play. I loved it. I wept. I saw it multiple times. I thought it was a brilliant piece of theater. And if you know anything about this play, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know anything about this play, do yourself a treat and dive down the research rabbit hole. I think the National Theater did film productions of it, which you could probably, find from or purchase from them or rent from them in some way. The stage play of War Horse is hugely, hugely powerful. And I would argue that is because of a critical design choice that they made. The plot of War Horse is in the context of the start of World War I. A lot of British horses were confiscated by the government for subscription to the army. The wider kind of plot elements, of course, is that World War I was the catastrophic conflict that it was because in many ways it was the first modern, in the 20th century sense, war. At the start of it, people were doing things on horseback, almost like they were coming from a different century because they were. They were doing Victorian cavalry charges against tanks, and the results were horrific. And the stage play of War Horse really, really, really leans in and explores this and demonstrates this in a way that, in my opinion, a children's novel doesn't even come close to touching. The design choice, though, that they made with War Horse is, the stage play, is that they chose to portray the titular character, the horse, with the use of a life-sized puppet. This puppet, again, go look at images online, go look at video online, but it took 2-3 people to control, and it is a masterful example of its craft. Not only that, there are other characters and elements that are displayed on the stage with the use of puppetry, and it creates a really, really powerful experience that in the immersive world of the theater, you can suspend your disbelief and really believe that what you're looking at is a living, breathing horse. What they did with this, life-size, human-powered puppet is genuinely incredible. Again, do yourself a favor if you haven't seen anything about it, go watch some footage. It's extraordinary. But why did this work so well? Well, number one, you can't put a live horse in the theater. At least not in the way that makes it a main character. Horses are animals with agency, and you can train them, but you can't make them the main character of your stage play in the same way. But by making Joey the horse, puppeted by humans, the way that they put it together, the way that they constructed this puppet, and the way that the play moves around him, you feel emotionally that you are looking at a living, breathing animal that has feelings and a soul and agency in the way that, children's literature has always been able to bring to life in magical ways, from Black Beauty to Charlotte's Web. There is a rich tradition of animals having, complex, not to say anthropomorphized, inner lives. And the play portrays this so beautifully. But it's not just in the character of Joey or one of the other horses. I'm going to give you a kind of random example. If you haven't seen the stage play, just be patient with me. But it's not just that, Joey the horse is portrayed by a puppet that looks and moves and breathes and flicks its ears in such a way that you think you're looking at a live animal. But there are other puppet characters that, to me, probably do a better job of proving the point that I'm trying to make, that, a design choice can give you something that is emotionally captivating and powerful that doesn't work the same way in the real world. So there's a secondary puppet character. It is the goose. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about, but it is a really charming character of, again, a goose, does what it says on the tin, but it is maneuvered around on the stage through like this handlebar and bicycle wheel contraption. It looks and moves and honks like a goose does in real life, but again, you can do things with a puppet that you can't do with a live animal, because God knows you can't train a goose. Those things are Satan's soldiers. But what the goose does in the context of the play is it offers almost humanish slapstick comedy elements. You know, it stares at characters, you know, with, you know, judgment or derision, or it's constantly trying to get into a door that always closes in its face, which the physical humor of those moments are very, very human in how a human comedic actor would approach something like slapstick. You can't make a live animal do that, but you can make a puppet do that in a way that feels like it's an animal, but also strikes the right emotional beats that you want for that moment of humor. All of which is to say, if you haven't seen, you know, the staged version of War Horse, you're missing out. It is a beautiful piece of live action theater. And it is, in my opinion, a million times better than the subsequent film that was made largely inspired by the stage play. Technically, there's not a lot wrong with War Horse the movie. It's decently reviewed, it's decently liked. It is Spielberg doing a war film, you know, so he's fine. It has genuinely beautiful cinematography and shots, and the music in it is very, very good. It is a technically competent film. But for me, when I watched it, I could not get out of my head the use of CGI in the character of Joey, the horse. You know, I was constantly aware that I was watching a CGI version of a horse in various action sequences or what have you. And, you know, trying to film a war movie through the eyes of a horse is an interesting choice. But, you know, you have Joey charging, you know, overcoming the trenches in some places with bombs exploding. I don't know. Like, I could never ever suspend my disbelief for the film the way I felt able to do with the stage show. And I think that's because the mediums were different. And because the mediums were different, you could indulge yourself in different aesthetic choices. I was personally 10 times more convinced by a puppet version of a horse powered by 3 men who I could see fully than I was by the CGI version of the same character done on film. I enjoyed the film. It was fine. I never needed to see it again after the first time that I watched it. Whereas, as I said, I saw the play multiple times because I found it so powerful. And I think that in very important creative decisions that using the physical constraints of a theater where you only have so much physical space in which to work, using the physical constraints of, you know, not being able to make a live horse do all the things that you need the character to do, and so finding a creative solution for it. Using a stripped back aesthetic of the stage play to allow the actions and the speech of the actors and the characters to really, really hit the audience instead of having to show the horrors of World War I on the screen. It makes for a different audience experience and a different, in my opinion, artistic experience. Mediums require different ways of thinking about art. So to bring this back on topic, I expect different things from a book than I do from a TV show. I expect the pacing to be different. I expect design choices to be made. And depending on those choices, I need them to make sense throughout the entirety of the viewing experience to give me the emotional payoff that I want. So after that long tangent, you know, what do I really, really like about the series Off Campus?